The carriage climbed slowly along the jagged mountain road, its wheels slipping on loose stones slick with morning dew. Inside, Anna sat with her back straight, her thin hands wrapped tightly around a small wooden box. The lid was carved with delicate roses, worn smooth by years of touch, the last thing her mother gave her before she died. She did not dare look out the window. The sheer cliffs and endless drops vanished into swirling clouds, giving the sense of drifting through a pale, endless void. Each jolt of the carriage rattled her bones, but she kept silent, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. When the carriage finally lurched to a stop, Anna looked up. Before her rose a sprawling stone estate, dark and angular, its roofline cutting sharply into the mist. Heavy iron gates stood open, as if yawning to swallow her whole. The driver, an older man with sunken eyes and a face carved like old bark, climbed down and pulled open the door. He did not offer his hand. Anna stepped onto the gravel, her boots sinking slightly into the damp stones. A cold wind swept her hair across her face, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something metallic and sharp. She turned toward the front steps. There stood Mr. Halden. He was taller than she had imagined, dressed in a long dark coat that hung like a shadow around him. His hair was streaked gray, combed flat against his skull. In one hand he leaned on a heavy iron cane, the tip sharp enough to pierce the ground beneath him. His eyes, small and pale, moved over her slowly, as if weighing each bone beneath her skin. Anna lowered her gaze instinctively, clutching the box tighter to her chest. "You are Anna," he said, his voice low and dry, like stones grinding together. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "You will find the estate orderly," he continued. "There is work enough here to keep idle hands from trouble. You will follow my instructions exactly, and you will not enter the West Wing under any circumstances." Anna swallowed, her throat raw. She nodded. Mr. Halden turned sharply and began up the steps without waiting for her. She hesitated only a moment before following, her feet slipping on the slick stone. Inside, the entrance hall was vast and cold. A grand staircase rose to the upper floors, each step polished to a mirror shine. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced ancestors who seemed to follow her every movement. 2 kitchen workers appeared in the doorway, their faces pale and expressionless. They stood silently as Anna passed, their eyes darting away when she glanced at them. Mr. Halden led her to a narrow side hallway. At the end stood a small room with a single narrow bed, a wash basin, and a wooden chair. A single barred window faced a wall of fog. "You will sleep here," he said. "Your tasks begin at dawn tomorrow." Anna stepped inside, feeling the walls close around her. Mr. Halden watched her for a moment longer, his eyes flicking briefly to the wooden box in her arms. Then he turned and left, shutting the door behind him with a quiet but final click. Anna stood alone in the gray light, her breath echoing softly against the bare walls. Slowly, she placed the box on the bed and sat beside it, her fingers resting on the lid. Through the barred window, the fog pressed close, as though it wanted to creep inside and take the last warmth from her body. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms together. In that moment, the estate felt less like a home and more like the mouth of something alive, waiting patiently to swallow her whole. The morning came harsh and colorless. Pale light crawled across the rough walls of Anna's small room, making every crack and stain feel alive. She sat at the edge of the bed, her wooden box still in her lap, her fingers tracing its carved roses as though they might bloom beneath her touch. A sharp knock rattled the door. Before she could answer, it swung open. Mr. Halden stood there, his iron cane tapping lightly against the floor, each sound a small threat. "Up," he ordered. His voice carried no anger, no warmth, only a flat expectation that she would obey. Anna rose quickly, setting the box on the bed. Mr. Halden's eyes flickered toward it, but he said nothing. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing for her to follow. They moved down the narrow corridor, the air growing colder with each step. The hall opened into a large kitchen where the 2 kitchen workers from yesterday stood waiting, their hands folded stiffly in front of them. The gardener, a thin man with a missing hand wrapped in an old cloth, stood near the back door, his eyes fixed on the ground. Mr. Halden pointed at Anna without looking at her. You rise before the bell. You prepare the fire, scrub the floors, wash the linens. You do not speak unless spoken to, he began, his voice echoing against the bare walls. Anna nodded once, her throat tight. You will not enter the west wing, he continued, turning his pale eyes on her at last. There are matters there beyond your understanding. You are not to ask questions about the previous maid. You are not to touch any locked doors. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. No letters leave this house without my approval, he added, his tone dipping lower. You belong to this estate now. You are here because of your debt. Never forget that. Anna's breath hitched, but she forced herself still. She thought of the wooden box upstairs, the only piece of her mother she had left, and she swallowed the rising dread. Mr. Halden turned sharply, his cane tapping a final judgment on the kitchen floor as he disappeared down the corridor. The workers remained silent, returning to their tasks without a glance at her. The gardener shifted slightly, his eyes flickering to Anna for just an instant before he turned and slipped out into the fog. She caught a glimpse of the stump wrapped in dirty cloth, a flash of something broken and resigned. Left alone in the heavy kitchen air, Anna slowly moved to the sink. She began washing the chipped bowls stacked high beside the basin, the water biting cold against her fingers. Her mind replayed Mr. Halden's words, each one sinking like a stone into her stomach. She looked up once toward the west wing hallway, the shadows there dense and motionless. Somewhere deep inside her chest, a small voice whispered that she should run, even now. But her feet remained rooted, her hands moving automatically through the water. Above her, the house seemed to settle into its bones, listening, waiting. The days blurred into a quiet, aching rhythm. Anna rose before the bell each morning, her fingers raw from scrubbing the floors and stoking the hearth. The cold stone halls of the estate swallowed every sound she made, leaving her alone with the echo of her own breath. The kitchen workers spoke little, their eyes always downcast. The older woman, with hollow cheeks and thin gray hair tucked beneath her cap, moved like a wraith, her movements precise, as if every gesture had been rehearsed 1,000 times. The younger man, pale and thin as a birch branch, never met Anna's eyes. His hands shook when he carried pots, and he always kept to the corners of the room. The gardener was even stranger. Anna saw him only in glimpses. A flicker of his bent figure near the vegetable beds, or a shadow slipping between the shed and the back gate. His right sleeve was pinned at the elbow where his hand had once been. Sometimes she thought she saw old scars peeking out beneath the cloth, but he would vanish before she could look closer. Once, while emptying dirty water outside, Anna saw him standing at the edge of the misty garden, staring toward the forest beyond the estate. His shoulders twitched as though he was bracing against an invisible blow. When she called out softly, he flinched so violently that he dropped the basket he was holding and scuttled away like a frightened animal. Inside, the portraits watched everything. Each ancestor's face carried the same cold eyes, the same rigid mouth. At times, Anna felt as though they moved slightly when she passed, leaning closer, listening to her breath. During meals, she ate alone at the small servant table. The kitchen workers stayed silent at the stove, the air heavy with the smell of boiled cabbage and ash. Sometimes she caught them exchanging small glances, but when she looked directly at them, their heads bent lower. At night, Anna lay in her narrow bed, the wooden box beside her pillow. She often pressed it to her chest in the darkness, feeling the faint grooves of the carved roses beneath her fingertips. It was the only softness left in her world. Sometimes, through the thin walls, she heard Mr. Halden's cane tapping in the halls, slow and methodical, as though he was counting each step or each heartbeat in the house. One night, half asleep, she thought she heard a woman's sob echoing from somewhere deep in the west wing. She sat up, her skin prickling, but the sound faded into the restless breathing of the estate. In the mornings, Mr. Halden would appear without warning, his eyes sweeping the room, pausing on her face as if he were trying to read something hidden there. Then he would leave, his cane marking a slow trail behind him. Anna realized she had become a moving part in this silent machine, like the others, each of them locked in quiet submission. Yet deep inside, beneath her trembling ribs, something small and defiant stirred, like the first flicker of a flame in a long-dead hearth. Anna learned to move without sound. She learned which boards would groan beneath her weight, which doors caught slightly at the hinge. Her hands adapted to the endless scrubbing and folding, moving with a mindless precision that left her free to listen. She listened to the kitchen workers breathing shallowly behind her. She listened to the gardener's footsteps retreating into the fog every dawn. Most of all, she listened for the tapping of Mr. Halden's cane, which seemed to echo through the house at every hour. The west wing called to her. Every time she passed the heavy double doors, she felt a subtle pull, a cold breath slipping across her neck. The doors were always closed, locked with an iron latch and a small brass padlock. Once she thought she saw a flicker of light move behind the seam, a brief shifting glow, then nothing. Late at night, she sometimes crept from her room to the main hall. There she would watch the moonlight slide down the grand staircase, catching the edges of the portraits in a pale shimmer. The painted eyes seemed to follow her, their mouths curved into faint, secret scowls. She noticed new details with each visit. A thin crack along the edge of a portrait's frame, a dark stain beneath a side table near the west wing, a single black hair snagged on the banister, too coarse to be her own. Mr. Halden often walked the corridors long after the house had gone still. Anna would hear his cane tap once, twice, then pause, tap, tap, then pause again, as though he was listening for someone else's breath. One evening, while scrubbing the parlor floor, Anna glanced up and saw him standing at the threshold, watching her. His face was expressionless, his small eyes glittering in the low lamplight. "You keep your head down well," he said quietly. "That is wise." She bowed her head quickly, her pulse thudding against her throat. When she looked up again, he was gone, as if he had melted into the wall. Later that night, she sat on her bed with the wooden box in her lap. She opened it carefully, revealing a single folded scrap of cloth and a narrow silver hairpin tucked inside. They were small tokens from her mother, too small to stop the emptiness pressing at her ribs. Through the barred window, she saw the fog push against the glass, seething softly, as if alive. Beyond it, she imagined the forest stretching out in endless black waves. Somewhere in the estate, she heard a door creak open and shut, then footsteps moving softly in the west wing. A muffled thump, then silence so thick it pressed against her ears. Anna pressed the box to her chest and curled into herself. The estate had begun to feel less like a place and more like a living creature, one that watched her every moment, breathing and waiting. The others around her had learned to stop looking. But Anna felt her eyes opening wider with each passing day, as though some hidden part of her refused to sleep, refused to kneel. Anna could no longer ignore the tug that pulled her toward the west wing. The silence there felt too heavy, too watchful, as if something waited just beyond the locked doors. Each day, as she scrubbed floors or mended linens, her eyes drifted toward that forbidden corridor. One gray morning, after Mr. Halden left for the village with his cane tapping a slow, echoing rhythm behind him, Anna found herself alone. The kitchen workers had retreated into the pantry. The gardener was outside, lost in the fog. Her heart thudded painfully as she stepped closer to the west wing doors. She set down her wash bucket, her hands shaking as they hovered near the cold brass padlock. Her breath came in short bursts, her fingers slick with sweat. She pressed her ear to the seam between the doors. At first she heard nothing, just the hush of the estate breathing around her. Then a soft sound, a muffled shuffle, like fabric dragging across wood. A quiet, low sob. Anna's entire body tensed. The sound was unmistakably human, unmistakably close. She grasped the padlock, testing it gently. It rattled but did not open. Her mind spun wildly. What was inside? Another servant? Someone locked away as punishment? Or the remnants of the previous maid no one dared mention? A loud crash behind her snapped her head around. The gardener stood at the far end of the hall, a bucket overturned at his feet, water spreading slowly across the floor. His wide eyes fixed on her hand, still gripping the lock. They stared at each other for a long, frozen moment. The gardener's lips trembled, but no words came. His remaining hand flexed against his side, his shoulders twitching like a cornered animal. Anna opened her mouth to plead with him, but he shook his head violently. With a strangled gasp, he turned and bolted down the corridor, his footsteps vanishing into the kitchen. Anna's stomach flipped. She ripped her hand from the lock and fled toward her room, stumbling up the narrow stairs. She barely managed to close the door behind her before collapsing onto the floor. Her chest heaved. Her ears strained for sounds of pursuit, but the hallway remained silent. When she finally crawled to her bed, she found the wooden box waiting on her pillow. She pressed it to her chest, as if it could shield her from what she had just risked. Hours later, when the sun began to dip behind the peaks, Mr. Halden returned. She heard his cane strike the floor, slow and deliberate. Each tap felt like a countdown. There was no knock when he finally reached her door, only the creak of hinges as he stepped inside. He said nothing at first. Anna did not dare look up. She felt his eyes rake over her, felt his breath enter and leave the room like a cold draft. Then his voice, low and cutting. "Curiosity," he whispered, "is a dangerous indulgence here." A long pause, then the door shut again, soft as a sigh. Anna remained frozen long after he left, her fingers locked around the box so tightly her knuckles blanched. In the gathering dark, she realized she had crossed a line she could never return from. And deep inside her, beneath the waves of fear, a small spark of something fierce and wild began to glow. The next morning arrived heavy with fog, the kind that pressed against the windows like a restless animal. Anna woke before the bell, her body stiff, her mind echoing with Mr. Halden's cold whisper from the night before. Curiosity is a dangerous indulgence. She dressed slowly, her fingers numb, her eyes flicking to the wooden box on her pillow again and again. Each carved rose felt like a question she could no longer ignore. As she moved through the early chores, the kitchen workers avoided her entirely. Their eyes dropped lower than usual, their hands moving faster, as though hoping to vanish into the steam rising from the pots. The gardener didn't appear at all that morning. Anna's heart thrummed with a wild, reckless beat. Near midday, while carrying soiled linens through the corridor, she paused near the back entrance. The fog outside swirled thick and low, masking the gardens and the edge of the path that led into the trees beyond. For the first time since arriving, the gate was ajar. Just slightly, but enough. She glanced around, no footsteps, no echo of the iron cane. Her pulse surged up her neck, roaring in her ears. Anna dropped the linens in a pile and stepped into the fog. The cold bit at her cheeks, soaked into her thin dress within seconds. She clutched her arms to her chest, stumbling toward the gate. When she reached it, she pushed it open with trembling hands. The rusted hinges wailed softly, a sound that felt far too loud in the muffled world of gray. Beyond, the forest trail vanished into the fog, a pale ribbon leading nowhere and everywhere at once. Anna stepped forward, her feet squelching in the wet ground. For a moment she felt a sharp, intoxicating taste of freedom slice through her fear. Then a figure appeared at the edge of her sight. The gardener. He stood motionless in the mist, his single hand gripping the side of the gate. His eyes, hollow and panicked, locked onto hers. She froze. Slowly he shook his head. Once, twice. Then he stepped forward, his mouth opening as if to speak, but only a strangled breath came out. Behind Anna, a sharp sound broke the silence, the echo of Mr. Halden's cane striking the stones inside the house. Anna turned back toward the estate. In the fog, she saw his shape approaching, tall and thin, the cane dragging slightly behind him. The gardener grabbed Anna's arm roughly, pulling her back toward the gate. She struggled, her nails scraping against his sleeve, but he was stronger than his frail appearance suggested. He dragged her inside and slammed the gate shut. As he did, Mr. Halden's cane struck the threshold, the sound like a hammer falling. Mr. Halden did not speak. His eyes moved from Anna to the gardener and back again. His expression remained flat, as though he were inspecting a broken piece of furniture. He raised one long finger and pointed to the ground at Anna's feet. "Clean," he said quietly. Anna lowered her gaze. Mud stained her skirt, and her hands shook as she bent to collect the discarded linens from the wet stones. Mr. Halden turned and walked back inside, his cane marking a slow, uneven rhythm. The gardener backed away, his shoulders shaking, his head lowered. For the rest of the day, Anna scrubbed the entry stones until her hands bled. No one offered her water. No one spoke to her. When she finally collapsed in her room that night, her fingers raw and red, she pressed the wooden box to her chest. Outside her barred window, the fog still clung to the estate, smothering the moonlight. Her first taste of escape had ended in chains she couldn't yet see, but somewhere deep inside, something refused to die. The following days dragged by like a slow fever. Anna moved through her chores with lowered eyes and trembling hands. Each corner of the house felt sharper now, each shadow deeper. The gardener no longer looked at her. He passed her in the hallways like a ghost, his face turned to the wall. The kitchen workers spoke in hurried whispers when they thought she wasn't listening. Their glances at Anna were quick and fearful, like mice waiting for a trap to snap. At night, Anna lay awake, clutching her wooden box, listening to Mr. Halden's cane echo through the halls. Each tap felt like a knock against her skull, a reminder that she was watched, always. One morning, while dusting the shelves in a narrow back hallway, Anna's fingers slipped under a loose floorboard. Her breath caught. She knelt quickly, glancing over her shoulder. The corridor was empty. With careful hands, she pried the board up just enough to see beneath. Her fingers found a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. She pulled it out and pressed it flat on her lap. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. She made me sign it, a contract of service, for life. She said I owed her my body, my silence. I heard the others above me in the West Wing. Their voices came and went like a fever dream. When I tried to leave, she locked me below. She said the house was hungrier than I was brave. Anna's stomach turned. Her fingers shook so badly she nearly tore the parchment. The words for life burned into her mind. She read on. If you find this, do not trust him. He inherits her hunger. He seals us here, makes us vanish. We are never truly gone. We become part of the walls, the halls, the fog. Run before he seals you too. Anna's vision blurred with tears. She folded the parchment quickly and slipped it into her apron. Her hands fumbled to replace the floorboard, her breath coming in shallow bursts. As she stood, she heard footsteps, slow and measured, the unmistakable drag of Mr. Halden's cane. Anna pressed herself against the wall, the parchment a burning weight against her hip. The footsteps grew louder, then paused just beyond the corner. She held her breath, her nails biting into her palms. Slowly, Mr. Halden's figure came into view. His pale eyes met hers, expression unreadable. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something behind her. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished down the hall, his cane scraping softly behind him. Anna slid to the floor, her chest heaving. She pressed her forehead to her knees, gripping the wooden box through her apron. She realized then that her fear was no longer just of the man, but of the house itself, of the way it seemed to listen, to remember. The walls pressed closer that night. Every sound became a threat, every breath a confession. But inside her, a thin, sharp line of defiance flickered to life, glowing like a hidden ember. She would not sign her name into these walls. She would not become another silent echo in the West Wing. The day after finding the hidden parchment, Anna felt the house watching her more closely than ever. The walls seemed to lean inward, the air grew thicker, her steps echoed louder. The kitchen workers wouldn't meet her eyes at all now. They turned away, their shoulders curled inward like dry leaves. That evening, after the last pot was scrubbed and the last candle snuffed, Anna climbed the stairs to her small room. Her apron weighed heavy with the secret parchment hidden deep inside its pocket. She paused at her door, her hand trembling on the handle. Behind her she heard it, the slow, patient tapping of Mr. Halden's cane approaching up the staircase. Before she could move, the door slammed open. Mr. Halden stood there, his pale face framed in the doorway like a death mask. His eyes fell on her apron pocket, as if he could see straight through the cloth into the hidden parchment. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Give it to me." Anna's throat closed. She took a step back, shaking her head. His fingers tightened around the cane, the iron tip clicking sharply against the floor. With terrifying speed, he surged forward and seized her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm. Anna gasped, the parchment slipping from her apron and fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. Mr. Halden released her wrist and bent slowly to pick it up. He held the parchment up, his eyes moving across the faded words. When he looked back at her, a cold, hollow amusement glimmered in his stare. "So," he whispered, "you wanted to know their secrets." Before she could respond, he struck her across the face with the cane. The world exploded into bright stars. She fell hard against the bed frame, the wooden box crashing to the floor beside her. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her upright, forcing her to her feet. The cane pressed into her spine like a branding iron. "You think you are different?" he hissed into her ear. "You think you are clever?" Anna's legs buckled, but he shoved her forward out of the room. Her bare feet scraped along the cold floor as he guided her down the staircase and into the depths of the house. He forced her through a narrow doorway into the cellar. The air changed instantly, damp, sour, thick with mold and old metal. She stumbled on the rough stones, her hands groping for anything to hold on to. Mr. Halden flung her forward. She landed hard on her knees, her breath punched out of her chest. Behind her, he slammed the cellar door shut, the sound final as a coffin lid. Total darkness swallowed her. Anna crawled blindly along the floor, her palms scraping against grit and old stains. The cold seeped into her bones, gnawed at her skin. She pressed her forehead to the ground, her body shuddering violently. The wooden box was gone, lost somewhere upstairs, or perhaps already claimed by Mr. Halden. She heard a lock slide into place above her, then silence so complete it roared in her skull. Hours bled together into something shapeless. Hunger gnawed at her belly. Her lips cracked with thirst. Her mind drifted, snatching at scraps of memory. Her mother's voice, the carved roses, the words in the hidden parchment. At some point she realized she was speaking aloud, whispering fragments to the dark. She didn't remember starting. When at last the door opened, a pale shaft of light knifed into the blackness. Mr. Halden stood at the top of the stairs, his silhouette sharp and inhuman. His voice floated down, soft and final. "Remember your place." Then he turned and left her alone in the cold, the door closing behind him with a quiet, merciless click. When the cellar door finally opened again, Anna no longer knew how much time had passed. Her lips were split and dry, her dress stiff with dirt and blood from her scraped knees and elbows. The pale daylight above burned her eyes as she crawled up the steps, every movement echoing pain deep into her bones. Mr. Halden was gone. The hallway above stood silent and still, the air strangely stale. No footsteps, no distant clink of dishes from the kitchen, no soft scurry of servants moving in fear. Only the oppressive hush of an estate holding its breath. Anna staggered into the corridor, her head spinning. She pressed one palm against the wall for balance, her fingers brushing the old wallpaper, worn smooth from years of hands like hers, desperate and trembling. Instinct drove her toward her small room. When she entered, her heart seized. The wooden box was gone. The bed was stripped, the blanket missing. On the bare mattress, a single folded piece of paper lay waiting. She picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, hurried, jagged. She was before me. I found her diary. She signed the contract under threat. She tried to escape, but he bound her mind first, her body second. I heard her in the West Wing until she fell silent. We all fall silent here. If you read this, you must not stay. Anna's breath hitched as she crumpled to the floor. She pressed the paper to her chest, her fingers curling into the thin fabric of her dress as if she could claw through it and hold her own heart. A sudden noise pulled her attention, the faintest creak of floorboards from the West Wing. A surge of nausea rose inside her, but she pushed to her feet, stumbling into the hallway. The portraits along the walls seemed to watch her with renewed intensity, their painted eyes narrowed in 1,000 silent judgments. She passed the locked double doors, her gaze catching on a small seam near the floor, almost invisible, but now unmistakable to her fevered mind. A hidden passage? A crawl space? Driven by something deeper than reason, she dropped to her knees and pressed her hands against the seam. The wood shifted slightly under her touch, sending a dry shiver up her spine. A single push and a thin panel swung inward, revealing a narrow gap behind the walls. A foul draft hit her face, sharp and stale, like breath held too long. Anna crawled forward, her shoulders scraping against splintered boards. The dark swallowed her almost immediately. Her breath rattled in her ears, each inhale heavy and ragged. After a few feet, she found herself in a cramped cavity behind the west wing. Dim light seeped through cracks in the inner wall, outlining strange shapes beyond, faint outlines of what looked like small beds, discarded clothing, and iron restraints bolted to the floor. A weak moan drifted to her, barely human. Anna's stomach twisted violently, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. She realized then, the west wing wasn't just locked, it was a prison, a hidden graveyard for minds and bodies broken beyond use. She pressed her forehead to the cold boards, her pulse thunderous in her skull. Each heartbeat echoed with one relentless command: leave. Leave before you vanish into these walls forever. With her last reserve of strength, Anna crawled backward, emerging from the passage as quietly as she could. She collapsed into the hallway, her lungs searing with each breath. She felt it then, an irreversible shift inside her. The fragile thread that had kept her obedient finally snapped. Anna barely made it back to her room before her legs gave out beneath her. She pressed her back against the door, her chest rising and falling in ragged waves. The paper she had found trembled in her fist, its words burning against her skin. The walls around her felt closer now, heavy with secrets she could no longer pretend not to hear. Every nail, every beam seemed to pulse with the memory of screams she could almost still hear behind the west wing walls. When the evening bell rang faintly through the house, Anna forced herself up. Her fingers fumbled to hide the paper beneath the thin mattress. She knew Mr. Halden would come. She felt it in her bones, like an approaching storm. She moved through her chores in the kitchen with stiff, mechanical precision. The kitchen workers kept their heads low, their movements jerky and nervous. The older woman dropped a spoon and flinched violently when Anna bent to pick it up. Anna caught the younger man's gaze once, just for a second. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but then he snapped his head away, trembling. Later, while carrying firewood past the garden door, Anna paused. The gardener stood outside, his thin shoulders hunched, his single hand trembling as he tried to prune a dead vine. She watched him carefully, the parchment's words echoing in her mind. She saw it now. The way his eyes darted toward the house every few seconds, the twitch in his shoulders, the small scars at his wrist that looked like old shackles. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, they both stood frozen. Two hunted animals seeing each other's wounds reflected back. Anna took a step closer, her lips parting to speak, but at that exact moment, the sharp tap of Mr. Halden's cane rang from the far end of the hallway. The gardener flinched violently, his head snapping toward the sound. He dropped his shears and fled into the fog beyond the garden gate, his figure dissolving into the gray like smoke. Anna's heart stuttered. She turned quickly, almost dropping the bundle of wood. Mr. Halden stood near the parlor entrance, his pale eyes locked on her. His gaze traveled slowly down to the trembling wood in her arms, then back up to her face. A long, icy silence stretched between them. Finally he spoke, softly, almost kindly. "You've been busy today." Anna swallowed hard, her throat raw. She forced a nod, her fingers digging into the splintered wood until they threatened to bleed. Mr. Halden stepped forward, his cane tapping a soft, mocking rhythm. He leaned close, so near she could smell the cold iron of the cane and something darker beneath it, something sweet and rotting. "Be careful, Anna," he whispered, his breath brushing her ear. "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Her skin crawled. She felt every hair along her spine rise, her entire body screaming to run, but she forced her legs to remain still. Mr. Halden turned away without another word, his cane tapping off into the hallway until he vanished into the gloom. Anna sagged against the wall, her pulse roaring in her ears. The veil between her and the estate's horrors had been torn open, and now she knew. Mr. Halden saw her. He did not yet act, but he was watching. That night, as she curled into her bed, Anna pressed her palms together around the memory of the parchment, the gardener's eyes, and the hidden crawl space. The house wanted her silent. Mr. Halden wanted her obedient. But in the darkness, a dangerous thought began to crystallize. She would not wait for the walls to claim her. Anna woke before dawn, her eyes snapping open to the dark. Her body felt like a shell, hollowed out by fear and hunger, but inside, something sharp and alive pressed against her ribs. Resolve. She dressed quietly, her fingers careful not to brush against the rough floorboards. Every sound felt amplified in the early silence, every movement a potential alarm. When she stepped into the hallway, she nearly collided with the gardener. He stood there in the dim light, his shoulders hunched, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. His one hand trembled at his side. They stared at each other, both frozen. Then, slowly, his eyes darted down to something in his hand, a small, dark shape. Anna's gaze dropped. In his dirt-streaked fingers, he held a key. The iron looked old and pitted, its bow wrapped in a thin strip of cloth. He extended it toward her, his hand shaking so badly she thought he might drop it. Her own hand rose, hesitant, as though in a dream. When their fingers touched, she felt the rough calluses on his palm, the heat of his fear pouring into her skin. "Gate," he whispered, his voice so thin she barely heard it. "The outer gate, at the edge. Fog, go!" Anna's breath hitched. Her fingers closed around the key, the cold iron biting into her skin like a promise. The gardener's eyes flicked to the end of the hallway. His face twisted as if he might cry or scream, but no sound came. Instead, he backed away, almost stumbling into the shadows, and disappeared down the back stair. Anna stood alone, the key clenched tight in her hand. Her entire body felt electrified, every nerve screaming. She hurried back into her room and closed the door softly behind her. With trembling hands, she lifted her thin mattress and slid the key beneath it, then sank to the floor beside the bed. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst through her ribs. She pressed her forehead to her knees, whispering fragments of half-formed prayers to no one. Hours dragged past in a blur. She forced herself to move through the day, gathering linens and washing pots, her fingers clumsy and raw. Each movement felt distant, as if she watched herself from far away. Mr. Halden appeared only once that day. His eyes slid over her like a blade, pausing on her hands as though searching for a hidden tremor. But Anna kept her head bowed, her breath held in her throat until he passed. That evening, in the thin glow of her single candle, Anna retrieved the key. She turned it over in her fingers, the iron dark and heavy. Tomorrow. She had to wait for the fog to return. She had to memorize every sound, every shadow. She pressed the key to her lips, then to her chest. For the first time since she arrived, she felt the smallest spark of hope, bright and painful as an open wound. She would run, and this time she would not be dragged back. That night, Anna barely slept. Her body remained curled on the edge of the bed, the iron key clutched against her chest under her thin shift. Every sound beyond her door, a floorboard creak, a distant tap of the cane, made her flinch, her pulse roaring in her ears. When pale morning light seeped through the barred window, she dressed slowly, careful to tuck the key deep into her apron pocket. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, each movement deliberate, as if she were preparing for a final performance. She moved through her chores mechanically, her eyes sharp, cataloging every hallway, every door latch, every place where the floor creaked too loudly. She watched Mr. Halden's patterns, how he drifted between rooms, where he paused to listen, how long he lingered by the west wing. The fog that day was thick and low, pressing against the windows like a living creature. Anna felt it waiting for her, calling to her with its gray fingers. In the kitchen, she pretended to scrub vegetables, her mind racing. The older woman shuffled past her face pale and exhausted. The young man avoided her entirely, keeping to the far wall. No one dared look at her for more than a heartbeat. At midday, when Mr. Halden stepped outside to inspect the garden path, his cane marking careful, slow points along the stones, Anna slipped back into her room. She pulled the key from her apron and pressed it to her lips. Tonight? She had no illusions now. She would not get another chance. She would not survive another punishment. She tucked the key into the lining of her dress and retrieved her wooden box from its hiding place under the floorboard. She ran her fingers over the carved roses one last time, her breath catching in her throat. She packed nothing else. No food, no blanket. She knew she could not carry more than her will and her single keepsake. That evening, she forced herself to appear calm as she helped prepare supper. Mr. Halden watched her more closely now, his eyes tracing her every motion. When she passed the serving platters, his thin fingers brushed her wrist lightly, a warning disguised as an accidental touch. Anna kept her head bowed. Inside, her thoughts burned like a lantern in a dark room. After supper, she cleaned the dishes with her hands moving in a blur. She listened for the creak of the main gate, the rustle of fog against the glass panes. When the final candle was snuffed and Mr. Halden's cane began its slow march down the hallway, she knew it was time. She retreated to her room, her chest heaving silently. She placed the wooden box against her heart and tucked it under her arm. The key felt warm now from her skin. She sank to her knees by the barred window and breathed into her cupped palms, whispering words she barely understood, a mix of her mother's lullabies and half-remembered prayers. When she rose, her limbs felt light and unreal, as though they belonged to a stranger. Tonight, she would not just walk out of the estate. She would tear herself from its jaws, leaving the echo of her defiance in every hall. Anna turned to the door, her hand gripping the key so hard it cut into her palm. Tomorrow would not come unless she made it through this night. The house had fallen into its heavy nocturnal silence. The fog pressed thick against the windows, turning each pane into a milky veil. Anna waited by her door, her hand wrapped so tightly around the iron key that her knuckles glowed white. When she no longer heard the canes echo down the hall, she slipped out. Each step felt like a heartbeat, each breath a scream held inside her chest. She moved quickly past the kitchen, past the darkened parlor with its silent portraits, their painted eyes fixed on her as though they might call out. The front corridor loomed ahead, the cold air seeping through cracks around the door. At the end of the hall, she saw it, the outer gate keyhole just beyond the last heavy door. Her fingers found the key at her side, trembling. But then, a sound, soft at first, a shifting of weight on the upper stair. Anna turned, her breath frozen in her throat. Mr. Halden stood on the landing above, the dim lantern glow catching the sharp line of his cheekbones and the glint of his iron cane. His pale eyes fixed on her, two small moonlit knives. For a moment, no one moved. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he began to descend, each step slow and deliberate. The cane tapped softly, punctuating the quiet like a cold metronome. "You disappoint me," he murmured, his voice drifting down like falling ash. "I thought you had learned your place." Anna's hand darted to the lock. The key scraped against the iron edge, refusing to find the groove. Her fingers slipped with sweat. Mr. Halden reached the bottom step. He did not rush. He took another step forward, raising the cane slightly. Anna slammed her shoulder into the door, fumbling wildly with the key. At last it slid into place. She turned it, heard the ancient mechanism grind and shift. Mr. Halden lunged. His cane swung down, cracking against her shoulder with a sickening thud. Anna shrieked, stumbling forward, her vision sparking white. She twisted, grabbing the cane with both hands. He pulled back, his face twisted in a cold snarl. For a moment they struggled, two silhouettes knotted in a silent, violent dance beneath the hanging lantern. Anna felt the sharp tip of the cane scrape her ribs. She bit down a scream and shoved forward with all her strength. The cane slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Mr. Halden staggered, his hands scrabbling for her throat. She swung the cane upward blindly, striking his jaw with a hollow crack. He fell backward, crashing against the wall. Blood bloomed across his chin, dark and sudden. His eyes rolled upward, the whites gleaming in the lantern light. Anna didn't wait to see if he would rise again. She turned and flung the heavy door open. Cold night air hit her like an ocean wave. She sprinted toward the outer gate, her legs numb, her heart hammering like a drum inside her skull. Behind her, she heard a ragged gasp, Mr. Halden's final broken breath echoing in the corridor. Anna reached the gate, shoved it open with shaking hands, and tumbled forward into the fog. In that moment, the estate behind her seemed to howl, as if the walls themselves realized she was gone. But she didn't look back. She ran into the blind gray, her fingers still wrapped around the blood-slicked cane. The fog swallowed Anna the moment she stepped beyond the gate, curling around her like a cold, damp cloak. Each breath burned in her throat, sharp and raw. Her bare feet slipped on wet stones and patches of moss as she stumbled down the narrow path, her fingers still gripping the iron key and Mr. Halden's cane. The mountain air cut through her thin dress, slicing into her skin like knives, but she did not slow. She forced her body forward, her mind flashing with fragments of the house. The crawl space behind the west wing, the kitchen worker's lowered eyes, the gardener's trembling hand. Branches clawed at her arms and face as she plunged into the forest beyond the estate. The trees loomed high and skeletal, their black limbs shrouded by drifting white. The path twisted and split, disappearing into the mist, but she didn't hesitate. Any direction was freedom if it led her away from those locked halls. Somewhere behind her, she imagined Mr. Halden's cane striking the stones, echoing through the fog. She felt his pale eyes searching for her even now, pulling at her spine, urging her to turn back. But she pressed on, her breaths coming in short, ragged sobs. When her strength faltered, she dropped to her knees in a small clearing. The cane clattered beside her. She pressed the wooden box to her chest, feeling the carved roses dig into her skin. It was all she had left of another world, another life. A world where she was someone's daughter, not a hollow echo in a haunted house. Above, the moon pushed faintly through the fog, a pale eye watching her shiver and bleed. The forest creaked and whispered around her, as if urging her to keep moving. Anna forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled, her dress hung heavy with dew and blood. She pushed forward again, stumbling over roots and stones, her mind flickering between terror and a single desperate command, "Go, go, go!" At last, she broke through the final line of trees. Ahead, a rough mountain trail curved downward, vanishing into a valley below. Beyond it, the first glimmer of dawn spread across the horizon, pale and soft like the memory of her mother's lullabies. Anna staggered forward, her eyes filling with tears that blurred the pale light into shimmering ribbons. She did not stop to wipe them away. Behind her, the estate dissolved into the fog, reduced to a distant, rotting thought. The walls, the locks, the portraits, all left behind in the gray maw of the mountain. Anna pressed the wooden box tighter, the warmth of it seeping faintly into her chest. With every painful step, she felt the grip of the estate loosen, the iron hold on her mind beginning to crack. She reached the edge of the trail and paused, gasping. She turned her face to the sky and let the cold morning air wash over her. She had crossed the threshold. Anna didn't know where the path would lead, or if safety even existed beyond the mist. But for the first time, the space before her felt like her own, open, terrifying, and alive. She took a shaky breath, lifted the cane as a crutch, and stepped forward into the fading night. The pale glow of dawn spread slowly across the valley, turning the distant slopes into wavering ghosts of blue and gray. Anna trudged forward along the narrow mountain trail, her feet numb, her lungs clawing at the thin, icy air. Each step felt fragile, as though the earth beneath her might vanish, but she kept moving. She had no choice now, only forward, only away. The iron cane she carried scraped along the ground, its weight both a burden and a strange comfort. In her other arm, she cradled the wooden box like an injured bird, her fingers pressed into the grooves of the carved roses until her knuckles turned white. She paused once to sit on a low stone ledge. Her dress clung to her body, torn and soaked, and her hair fell in matted strands across her face. She drew her knees to her chest, curling around the wooden box. Slowly, she opened it. The scrap of cloth inside, her mother's, was damp but intact. Anna pressed it to her cheek, inhaling what little scent remained, a ghost of warmth and safety. Tears rose, unbidden and hot. She let them come, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face into the cloth. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she allowed herself to cry. her sobs swallowed by the quiet morning. When the trembling subsided, she lifted her head. Below her, the valley opened into a winding road, perhaps a path to a village, perhaps just another labyrinth. But it was open. It was hers to choose. Anna wiped her face with the cloth and tucked it carefully back inside the box. She pressed the lid shut and held it tight against her heart. She turned the iron cane in her hand, studying the grooves and scratches left by Mr. Halden's grip. With a quiet, deliberate motion, she cast it aside. The cane tumbled down the rocky slope, vanishing into the fog below with a soft, distant clatter. A final severing. Anna stood, swaying slightly as she found her balance. The rising sun lit the edge of her face, turning her pale skin golden, igniting her hair into soft flame. She took a step forward, then another. Each movement felt like tearing free of invisible chains, small, aching bursts of freedom. With every step, she repeated a single silent promise to herself. I will not be a ghost. Her path bent toward the valley, the light slowly pushing the mist back, revealing the shape of a road winding through distant fields. She did not know what waited beyond the next turn. Perhaps another door, another set of walls, but the choice to step toward it, that was hers now. Anna pressed the box to her heart one last time and began to walk. And with that first firm step into the clearing sun, she crossed fully from the shadows of captivity into the fragile, terrifying promise of her own life.